Hey everyone, for those of you that don't know me, I'm Stephen Turner from the Technical Services team here in APAC. And thanks for joining me to look at an exciting development in our Hive journey. What is it? Well, let me give you a clue. You and your customers have been asking for it, needing it, pleading for it to be included. And we've listened. And we've been working really hard to bring you what you need. Groups in Hive. I know. I am as excited as you are. So today, I'm going to walk you through some of the functionality that you can expect to find when we release this in coming months. So, what will we cover? Well, today, we're going to cover 3 main points. Firstly, we're going to talk about who, what, and why in relation to groups. Secondly, I want to give you a bit of a look at groups working in the product. And thirdly, we'll talk about future roadmap items. But before we get too far into this, I do want to make a note that at the time of this recording, we're still at the alpha stage of the release cycle, which means some of the items you're going to see here today may change by release, or I may not be able to show you the full functionality as we are still under development. But we didn't want to wait until it's finished before revealing it to you. So we've busted out the alpha version to share. Okay, before I get too far off track, let's talk about why we've created groups, what features will be available in our initial release, and who this is going to help. So we've created groups in Hive for a couple of different reasons. By including groups in the product, it will allow companies and administrators to be more selective around the users that they import into their Hive environment. Currently, if a company wants to limit the use of Hive in their business, they need to either selectively invite users, limit self-sign-up options by domain name, or import those users from a CSV. Now, this makes it quite difficult for those businesses that have a large number of users in their IDPs when it comes to selectively choosing who will be invited to print. So, Groups is going to help simplify this process. Groups will also allow administrators to manage access and permissions much more easily than they can today. And based on the feedback, we've decided to kick this off with quotas and print queue deployment. So with quotas, administrators will be able to set an initial balance for new users in a specific group. They'll be able to allow group quota adjustments to occur and have a recurring quota applied to all users in a group. And then with print queue deployment, this is going to increase the manageability of deployment by now allowing groups to be selected as a deployment option. Previously, for print queue deployment, targeting specific users was conducted by including each user individually in the rules. Okay, enough of looking at me. Let's kick off with the product and take a look at how this is going to work and what it looks like in the product itself. So, as you're all aware, for existing sync sources, we've been using add-ons for administrators to be able to synchronize users from Entra ID with PaperCut Hive. Now, with our new user and group sync configuration, there'll be no need for administrators to use an add-on for this functionality. This will be built right into the product to make it even easier to get set up and running. So let's navigate our way over to user and group sync page. Now, we're going to do this via our new settings button. Over here on the left-hand side, down the bottom, you'll see settings is there. What we've done is we've pulled it out from that top profile section to make it even easier to locate and access. So if we hit on settings, you'll see that it takes us to that same settings page that we would get when we were coming from that user profile. And from here, we can access user and group sync. Now, when we get into user and group sync, we're going to add our sync configuration. So if I click on this here, because we're in alpha stage at the moment, you'll see that Microsoft Entra ID is the only option that we have available here for us. When we get to the beta and alpha stages of the release of this, Google Workspace will be available when we get to channel access, which will be around July. And shortly after GA, we're also going to have Okta available as an option. But for now, I'm going to select Microsoft Entra ID. And it's going to take me into my configuration settings for Microsoft Entra ID. First thing I need to do, of course, is authorize Microsoft Entra ID. So let's go ahead and do that. And it's going to come up telling an administrator what permissions they're going to need to be able to authorize this connection. So we're going to hit continue. And it's going to take me off to authorize myself with my Microsoft Entra ID environment. So let's go ahead and authorize. So I'll put in my details. And what pops up next is a page from Entra ID talking about the permissions that we're requesting to be able to access it to pull into Hive. Now, one thing to note here, we are connecting to Microsoft Entra ID utilizing the Microsoft Graph API to be able to connect us. So we're not using a skim connection, it is Microsoft Graph API here. So once we've reviewed the permissions that are being requested, I'm going to hit accept. And when I hit accept, that's then going to go through the process of connecting my Hive instance with my Microsoft Entra ID. Now that it says we've successfully authorized Microsoft Entra ID, I'm going to finish setting up this connection. So I'm going to come down to name, and you'll see that by default we've called it Entra. Now, we will be allowing multiple sync sources to be able to be used once this gets to GA. GA being general availability, of course, for those of you that may be querying why I'm saying GA. What we can do here is we can give this a more appropriate name so that when a synchronization occurs, I can actually validate which sync source it has occurred to. So instead of Entra, I'm going to call it Steve's Snazzy Entra Sync. And I'm then going to go down and look at what users I want to pull from Entra ID into PaperCut Hive. Now, as we've always had, we've got the option here to sync all of my users into the system, but thanks to the groups connection we've got, we can now sync users from specific groups. So let's choose that option, and you'll see we've got a drop-down list which will show all of the various groups that I've got available within my Entra ID. Now, I can start typing the name of the group that I want for it to quickly jump to that section to bring up the group names that I want. So I'm going to import Stephen Test, and I'm going to import Stephen Test Management. And you'll see that when I click them, a tick appears here, but they also appear in the box above. So with those two selected, I'm going to take a look at my user attribute mappings. So I'll hit Edit Attribute Mappings, and you'll see that what we've done is we've actually looked at what the standard Entra ID attributes are and linked them already for you in our PaperCut Hive attributes. So things like email, username, full name, etc. are already configured, ready to go. What we have done though, at the bottom of the screen, you'll see that we've got access code, card number 1 and card number 2 that we've left blank. Now, the reason we've left this blank is because when we spoke to a number of different companies, we realized that there was no set attribute mapping that people would use in Entra ID that we could effectively link to PaperCut Hive. So we've left them blank so that if you've got any customers that want to use these fields, they're able to go in and define which fields they've used for access codes or card numbers. Now, once we've checked these and we're happy with them, we're going to hit apply. Now on my screen at the moment, you'll see the next option there is sync schedule. Now when this goes live, we'll have 2 additional options on the screen here. One will be email invitation for new users, and one will be test configuration. Now, email invitation for new users will be a spot where you can specify what the actions will be for new users synchronized by this sync source. So for example, am I going to email a link to the user portal? Am I going to email them the classic invitation, or don't send any invitation emails automatically? What this does is it will provide an admin the ability to manage invitations to Hive on a per sync source basis, instead of it being the current org-wide settings that we've got configured there. Now that second option I was telling you about, that'll be test configuration. Now this is going to allow an administrator to run a sync process without importing users into the system, kind of as a validation check for them to perform prior to performing the actual sync process. Now let's go to the sync schedule. Now sync schedule, we've got manual sync or we've got automatic. When we click on automatic, you'll see the frequency we've got defined here at the moment as weekly or monthly. Now, by August, so by general availability, this will also include a daily sync option being available. But for right now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to choose it to be a manual sync process for me. Now, before I get off this screen though, there will be an additional thing that will be available here very shortly. And that's the option for administrators to choose whether they want to delete users when they get removed from the sync source or not. That's not in my current version, so you can't see that here. But when that option is selected, it will allow our sync source to become the source of truth and allow administrators to be able to manage their users in Entra ID, which will then automate the removal of users in Hive when they get removed from Entra. The other option that we're going to have available will be for admins to decide if they wish to import disabled users into Hive during a sync source as well. So just be aware they're not on this, but they will be coming soon. So now that I've made all my changes, I'm going to hit save. And you'll see that my sync source now appears here. If I scroll along to the end of this sync source, you'll see there's a sync now button that is available, and I could click that now to perform my manual sync. Before I do that, however, I'm going to set some management groups up in PaperCut Hive because I haven't done that yet. All I've done so far is to set up who is going to get pulled into PaperCut Hive from those two groups. So let's jump across to the new groups option we have here, again on the left-hand side. And you'll see when we jump in here, we've got an all users group already defined in the system. Now, the all users group, of course, if I make a change to this group, every single user that exists within PaperCut Hive will have permissions or restrictions applied to them, because everybody is part of that group. What I want to do though, is I want to have a more targeted approach. So I'm going to add groups. And again, I'm presented with that drop-down list that we saw earlier when we were syncing users. I'm going to jump down again to the Stephen section, and I'm going to bring in Stephen Test Management, and what the heck, I'll bring in Stephen Test 2 as well. Just because I can pull in any group. They don't have to be the groups that I synchronize my users from. I can pull any group in from my Entra sync source. So now I'm going to add those. And you'll see that they now pull into here, available for me to be able to manage. Now I'm going to click on Stephen Test. And for Stephen Test, I'm going to give any user that's in Stephen Test a balance of $10. And I can define here if they're unrestricted or restricted. So I'm going to make it a restricted account. And I'm going to jump across to quotas and automations. And I'm going to turn on quotas and automations. And here I can actually define the frequency that someone will get a quota defined to them. So I've got daily, weekly, monthly, and yearly. Let's make it weekly. And we're going to add $10 every week. But I've got an option here that says allow accumulation up to, and I'm going to say I'm going to allow accumulation up to $20. And once I've done that, I am going to hit Save Changes. And I'm going to go to Stephen Test Management now. For Stephen Test Management, I'm going to give it a starting balance of $20, but I'm going to leave it unrestricted. And when I go to Quotas and Automation, I'm also not going to turn on any quotas for this group. We'll then save the changes for that. And now that I've defined what those initial group settings are going to be for people in both of those groups, I'm going to go back to my sync source and I'm going to perform that manual sync. So when I click manual sync, it says, hey, we're going to run it. We'll start sync. And you'll see down the bottom it pops up saying syncing now. If you want to see what the success was of that sync process, we can jump across here to logs and go to our activity log. And when our activity log comes up, you'll see here I've got an entry saying user and group sync for Steve Snazzy Entra sync, finished successfully. We created 3 users, updated 0 and deleted 0. Now, if there had been a problem with this sync process, it would state here that there was an issue and there'd be a text file that you can actually open to view what went wrong. So now that we've pulled our users in, let's jump across to the users tab. And you'll see in here it's pulled my 3 users into the system, and you can see Daniel and Peter here were both part of my management, Steve's management group, and they've been given $20. My account was part of the other group and I've been given $10 automatically. So that's how it will work for the quota side of things. Now let's take a look at going across to the print queue deployment side of things. So let's jump to print queues. And in here you'll see I've got my find me queue set here. And a lot of this is going to be very familiar for you. So we're going to go to the details, which brings up my find me queue. And I've got my options here for all users, or if I want to use deployment rules. So if I say I'm going to use deployment rules, and I'm going to create a rule, and I'm going to say limit by group as my rule name. Now, in here, it'll be very familiar to you, right? We've got limit to network, we've got limit to hostname, as we've always had. Now we've got limit to users and groups. So if I click on that option, and it'll bring up a search window for me, and I'm going to put Stephen in here again. And you'll see that it will then return the results available for the groups that I've imported, but it also shows the users that have the name Stephen. So I'm going to choose Stephen Test, and I'll put Stephen Test Management in here as well. They're the 2 groups I want to deploy this to. And we'll hit save. We'll hit save again, and we will deploy to our users. So that will now deploy out to my Stephen Test and my Stephen Test Management group that we've now defined for that rule. So that's what it looks like from the print queue deployment side of things. I know it was a really super quick run through as a demonstration here, but let me talk to you now about some of the things that are still under construction for groups. All right, so the roadmap items. So right now in Alpha, we've just run you through all of the things that are in the Alpha stage of the product, with those couple of extra things that I was talking about that will be included in shortly. The handling of deleted users, handling of disabled users. One I didn't mention, there'll actually also be an ability to filter users by groups coming into the system soon as well. We've run through all these things. We don't need to talk about them anymore. What you want to know is what's the next thing that's coming. So available as of channel access, we're going to have the ability to sync users and groups from Google Workspace. So exactly as we've had for Entra ID, we're going to have that same functionality available for Google Workspace. Shortly after that is public beta, which is mid-July to the end of July. Now in that section, we're going to have management options available. So print and scan policies will allow us to utilize groups to then perform restrictions against some of that functionality. We're also going to have the ability to use our groups for bulk operations. So deleting groups, attribute map testing, it's all here on the screen as you can see. General availability, We'll have the daily sync, as I was talking to you about before, and we'll have reporting against departments and offices as groups. And we'll have the ability to have up to 5 sync sources available to be utilised in the product. Now, post-GA, we talked about Okta coming. Okta will come post-GA. Not too far after we've released, but that will give you the option for that connecting and authorising to Okta. And again, having all those options that we've been talking about with Entra, that will be available for Okta as well. So that's where we're at, that's where we're going, and that's what's coming in the coming couple of months. Now, I know it was a really quick run through for groups, but I hope that seeing the solution has you all as excited as I am. Now, if you have any customers waiting on this feature, please remember to send them to the Percolator page where they can sign up and get access to groups from the start of July. Otherwise, public beta will be mid-July and general availability August. Thank you all for your time, and I hope you have found this beneficial and you are as excited as I am. Thanks all.